Draft day is here. The 2022 NBA draft is tonight, and players like Malaki Branham and E.J. Liddell are anticipating where they will land in tonight's draft. What are some possible landing spots for these two basketball players? What kind of pro prospects are they? We will answer those questions and a whole lot more on today's episode of Locked on Buckeyes.
You are Locked on Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked on Buckeyes, part of Locked on Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Thursday, June 23rd in the year 2022, and I want to thank you for making Locked on Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. On today's episode, we will continue our Buckeye road trip around the NFL, getting an update on what to expect from Malik Harrison in this upcoming Baltimore Ravens football season. Kevin Ostreicher from Locked on Ravens will join us for that. But before we get to any football talk, we will have Brandon Simberg, the lead NBA draft writer for Busting Brackets, with us to discuss what we can expect tonight and where Liddell and Branham will go in tonight's draft. Draft day is amazing, and honestly, this is the first time we have talked anything basketball in probably 2 months. Maybe longer. I believe the last time we had a basketball conversation on this show was around the time of the NC2A tournament. The Buckeyes got bounced out in March. We may have had a aftermath show or something like that in April with my guy Corey Thompson of Scarlet and Great on the YouTube. But that's it. Football's king here. But I can't wait to see what is going to happen tonight with Liddell and Branham as they get drafted tonight in the 2022 NBA draft. I'm going to back away, bring in Brandon Simberg. We had a fun conversation about Liddell and Branham, and he gave us a great little look and some possibilities of places that these two guys will go in tonight's draft. It's draft day, and there's only one person that has been here before on the podcast I would love to bring back for this big moment. It is Brandon Simberg. He is the lead NBA draft writer for Busting Brackets. Brandon, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be back, Jay. This is obviously a super exciting time for me, and it should be an exciting time for Buckeyes fans too, as Ohio State has two players I fully expect to get picked tonight. So, yeah, it's an exciting time, and I'm glad to be back.
Very, very exciting. Like I told you before we started recording, it's been very heavy with football lately, especially recruiting, with June being a big recruiting month for football. But there's excitement surrounding the draft. What are your thoughts about the draft overall and your excitement about what's going to happen tonight?
Yeah, I think, it's been called a weak draft before, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. I like a handful of the prospects at the top: Jabari Smith Jr. from Auburn, Paolo Banchero from Duke, Purdue's Jay Ivey, who I'm sure Ohio State fans are happy they don't have to play against anymore, and Gonzaga's Chet Holmgren. And then from there, I think it's an interesting mix of guys I have ranked from like 15 to 40, honestly, that could all end up in different spots and could all have different kind of careers and some interesting bets. And I think both Malaki Branham and E.J. Liddell fall into that range, although I have Malaki a bit higher. But yeah, I think it's overall a pretty good draft, and I think a lot of crazy things could happen tonight.
Crazy is a good word, because I do expect some crazy things to happen, either via trades or guys going either higher or lower than they are projected to go. You mentioned Jaden Ivey. I would be happy if the Pacers ended up drafting Jaden Ivey. But a lot of Cavaliers fans are in Northeast Ohio, and they hope that Malaki Branham stays in the area and goes to Cleveland. Before we get to your projection about where he may land, what are your thoughts about him and projections about him being an NBA player?
Yeah, I like Malaki a lot. I have him 13th on my board. Being in Champaign, I got to see a handful of prospects play this year in person. And I'll give Illinois credit and Illinois senior guard Trent Frazier some credit. He did a really good job of kind of locking up a lot of these big-name prospects. Like Johnny Davis struggled. Jaden Ivey didn't have his best game the first time. But Malaki came to Champaign and lit up Illinois for 31 points. I think he's a super poised kid, super mature. He knows how to score. Like I think that's the skill that's going to take him farthest in the NBA. He's 6'5". He shoots it really well from mid-range. Wasn't a great three-point shooter, but if you shoot it well from the mid-range and you shoot free throws well, that projects to you being a good three-point shooter. He's got a good wingspan. I'd like to see him be a little more effective on defense, but he's young, and I think that's things he can grow into. So I think Branham is going to stick in the league for a while as a score-first guard with kind of some defense and playmaking coming second.
I'm right there with you. I know people have knocked certain things about his game. I don't really care much about the three-point shooting, and I care about it, but I don't put much stock into it saying, oh, he's not a good three-point shooter. He's not going to be someone that's going to be a good NBA player. There's numerous guys in the NBA that are mid-range guys. That's where that's their bread and butter. That's their sweet spot, or that's where their sweet spots are. And they're very good at the next level. I do think Branham in his mid-range game, his ability to get to a sweet spot via a 1 or 2 dribble pull-up is going to be a big thing for him in a big way about how he'll score in the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't think the mid-range is dead. I think it's a useful tool. It's a useful skill. You can run actions to get him in his spots. At 6'5", if they want to put a shorter guard on him, he's just going to rise over you and shoot that. And if they want to pressure him with a bigger, slower guy, I think he'll eventually have the ball handling skills to go by him.
What are some weaknesses? You touched on one very, very briefly there, but what are some weaknesses you have seen in his game as scouting him and comparing him to other guys in this draft?
Yeah, no, I mentioned the defense, and I don't think he's a bad defender, but for someone who's going to be playing on the wing, you'd like him to be a little bit better. He didn't have great steal or block numbers. I think a large part of that is the Chris Holtmann defensive scheme. They're not really asking him to pressure the ball or cause a ton of turnovers, but I thought he was a little bit lenient on the ball sometimes. I think his ball handling could be a little bit better. He's kind of a shoot first, score first mentality guy, and he's not really breaking guys down off the dribble. I do like him in some pick and roll sets, but if he's going to be a scorer, eventually he's going to be asked to kind of create his own shots a little bit better. And so I don't think he has that in him right now necessarily, but again, he's young. He is a late bloomer. Ohio State really didn't unlock him until the second half of the season. And so I think there's just more room to grow, and there's more kind of low-hanging fruit that he can pick on.
What about his physical body? Is he strong? Does he need to put on some muscle? Is it something that has a big flaw and a big hole in him? What do you think about him physically and how he projects at the next level?
Yeah, I mean, he's just under 6'6" in shoes, which is a little bit shorter for a 3 kind of. He's not really going to be able to slide up and play the 4, so there's not a ton of position versatility, but he can play the 2 and the 3. He measured with a 6'10" wingspan, which, again, is great for his defensive projection. NBA, they love wingspan and long arms, but that helps you on both ends of the floor. And, yeah, he's definitely a little bit skinny, but, again, he's only 19. I don't see a reason why with an NBA weight program he won't be able to bulk up a little bit.
I think he'll need to bulk up. That's one of the big, I say flaws. It's college in basketball. Basketball in class, they're putting on weight. Sometimes they don't go hand in hand, and it's not a great formula for you to really put on weight. But I do think that was one area where if he stayed in school this offseason, I would have expected him to put on significant weight, significant muscle, because that was one area this past season we watched him play. You mentioned the Illinois game. He had a good game against Nebraska, but there were other times you saw that him being a freshman, him being 18 years old, I think I saw at one point he weighed 180 pounds. All those factors went into him being someone that was not physically strong enough in certain matchups to exploit the person that was guarding him. So I do anticipate him getting to the NBA and putting on some muscle because, Brandon, he needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the thing we don't talk about with a lot of these freshmen is that even their high school careers and their development towards the end of their high school careers, it was derailed by the pandemic and COVID.
Yes.
A lot of them missed a lot of time playing basketball and the access to these weight rooms. So I think a lot of these freshmen are skinnier and not as physically developed because they missed that time. So he's definitely not alone in that. And I agree he needs to add weight. But like you said, without the other kind of school stuff and the grueling college season, and if he has time this offseason to get in with an NBA weight program, I think that weight gain is attainable.
Brandon, you said you have him at 13th on your board for ranking the prospects. Where do you think he falls in tonight's draft?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think his range could potentially start at 13 with the Hornets. They have 2 picks at 13 and 15. I pretty confident they'll use one of them to take a big. But then, they're kind of looking for wingish players to pair around with LaMelo Ball, and I think Branham could fit there. You talked about Cleveland at 14. That's another team where they have their big men of the future in Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. They have a point guard, Darius Garland. So I think Branham scoring on the wing could help them for sure. And I mean, the last time they took somebody from St. Vincent St. Mary's, it worked out pretty well. I know that would make the fans happy. I think Atlanta at 16 is another team. Again, they have their point guard, the lead guard of the future with Trae Young, and I think that would be another good fit. I'm not sure Houston or Chicago at 17, 18, or Minnesota at 19 would be super interested. I've seen him fall down to 21 on a mock draft is the lowest I've seen him. So, but being a wing, I think teams like to load up on wing players, and you can play them across different positions, and you can play multiple wings at a time. So I'd say his range is probably 13 to 21. I'd be surprised if he fell lower than Denver at 21. I think he probably goes somewhere in the middle there.
We're here with Brandon Simberg. He's the lead NBA draft writer for Busting Brackets. From Malaki Branham, who was what I call the flourishing freshman during the season, to a guy who was a phenomenal leader. Coming into the season, we all knew E.J. Liddell would be able to play good basketball. Maybe we didn't know how good of basketball he was going to play or how much better he could get, but we all knew he was going to play good basketball. You watched him play a lot. I know you got to see him play some this year as well. What are your thoughts while you're scouting Liddell ahead of tonight's draft?
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked EJ. He played in Illinois, so I've been scouting him as a high schooler, and he just, like you said, he's a good leader. He's noticeably a hard worker. He gets better every time, and he entered the draft last year. I got to see him at the combine, and without a reliable jumper, I was just like, I'm not sure how he's going to stick offensively in the NBA. But he took that feedback, and he shot the ball really well from three this year, and even made some tough shots. And so now that kind of makes him an interesting floor spacing 4, small ball 5. I know he's going to finish. He's a great 2-foot leaper. I just think that EJ is too smart, too good of a kid, and now that he shoots, I just don't really see how he completely fails in the NBA. He just strikes me as someone that, even if he's not this all-star starter, even if he's a bench big, I just think he's going to be too smart and too good to completely fail out.
Do you think his height at 6'6" will hurt him in the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, because, there's going to be matchups with bigger fives, and especially if teams want him to play the 5 as a rim protector. He's a great shot blocker. The fact that he blocked 83 shots at his size is incredible. And he has good instincts and leaping ability. But yeah, there's going to be bigs that are 7 feet or 6'11" that he's going to be asked to guard, and that's going to be a problem. And people say oh, he probably won't be able to guard Joel Embiid, but I mean, nobody can guard Joel Embiid. That's not
good point. Good point.
Of course he'll struggle against Embiid. So I think it'll hurt him a little bit, but I do think he can play the 4 in certain lineups. And I think the thing we've seen, especially in the playoffs, is teams downgrading their size at center. And now you see guys like 6'7" Grant Williams playing center. And so in the playoffs, when teams just want to get 5 smart players with some ball skills and floor spacing available, Liddell could become even more valuable in those playoff situations, like a Grant Williams.
Do you see an area? Now I'm going on a huge stretch here because these two players do not play the offensive game that is similar. But could you see it progressing quickly to be more of a Draymond Green? You may say, Jay, you're crazy. Is he more of a Draymond Green in 5 years or PJ Tucker? Let's go that way.
Yeah, I think I hate comparing people to Draymond, because Draymond is.
I do too, but I wanted to go off the wall with one guy, then one guy is maybe more similar.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Draymond is the one thing that Draymond will definitely do that I don't project EJ to get to is the passing and the playmaking. And EJ was a better pass this year, especially he's double teamed at the post. He's looking over the defense. He's making skip passes. But Draymond's ability just to initiate offense and run offense from the center spot is something I don't think we'll see EJ get to. I do think the PJ Tucker comparison is the accurate comparison, I think. And that's not a bad thing. PJ Tucker is a very good NBA player who's been very valuable, who's been able to stick in the league for a while. So I like the PJ Tucker comparison more. I also think EJ's a better shooter than Draymond, like PJ. So
I only say those two because they're similar in height. I think Draymond's maybe 6'7", to PJ Tucker might be 6'5", so they're similar in height. The weirdest thing about PJ Tucker that I always hear, and I looked it up recently, PJ Tucker was Big 12 Player of the Year back when he played in the Big 12. So of all things, I did not realize he was that good in college. I knew he was good to get to the NBA. I didn't realize he was that good in college. And so Liddell did not win conference player of the year, but he was still a really good force in the Big Ten Conference. Would you say is his biggest strength and his biggest weakness? Liddell's, that is.
Yeah, I think his strength will be his ability to be 6'7" and survive at the 5 for stretches of time. And it's the shot blocking. Like, again, he's not overly long. He is actually a pretty good, like, athletic leaper. He does get off of 2 feet really well. It's just the timing. Like, you kind of go back and watch his blocks. Like, he knows when a shot is going to go up and, like, the angle to get to that shot. And I do think he'll protect the rim, like, decently well at NBA level for his size. So I think that's probably his biggest strength. And then weakness, I guess, foot speed on the perimeter. If he's going to be put in pick and roll, if teams are going to put him in pick and roll actions and try to get him to switch, or, if he has to guard like a quicker 4 or a quicker wing, I don't love his foot speed. And I think he could get burned off the dribble a little bit, but that's a problem that a lot of bigs have.
It is. It definitely is. Brandon, you said you think you gave us Brandon's projection a little bit earlier in the show. Where do you think Liddell is going to fall in this year's draft?
Yeah, so I would love him. I would love it if a team in the 20s took him. Like, I think he's somebody, if you're a bad team, he helps you because he makes you a little bit better, but like, he's not going to make you this playoff contender if you were a bad team. So I think when you look at the teams in the 20s that are already pretty good and want to kind of get better on the margins, like, the Denver Nuggets, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Miami Heat, I think those are like the fits. Those teams are all picking kind of in the 20s. Those are the fits that I really like for him the most, because he can kind of go in and come off the bench and he's going to impact winning. And then who knows, next April, we could be talking about him the way we talk about Grant Williams, as like, oh, this small ball center that fell in the draft a little bit that made a huge impact by hitting some threes and protecting the rim.
I love it. I love it. Got a projection on Branham, a projection on Liddell. I'm excited for the draft. I'm also happy that Brandon Simberg could come back on the podcast to talk some ball with me once again. Brandon, thank you for coming back on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, Jay.
One live NBA draft show is not enough for Locked On. The entire NBA channel is going live on NBA draft night. So if you have a favorite NBA team, make sure you subscribe now to the Locked On YouTube channel so you get notified when they go live on draft night. Connecting with hosts during the offseason from the Locked On NFL family, it's always fun. They bring a different flavor. It's always fun just getting to catch up and meet different people like Kevin Oestreicher, who is back with us today. Kevin is the host of Locked On Ravens. And as we continue our Buckeye road trip around the NFL, we recently heard Kevin discuss season expectations for J.K. Dobbins. He even told us who he predicts would get the more carries between Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Today, we're not talking about Dobbins once again. It's more Malaki Harrison, someone that got drafted by the Ravens in the same draft as Dobbins in the following round, 3rd-round pick of the Ravens, Mr. Malaki Harrison. Kevin, I'm glad you're back to discuss another former Buckeye.
Yeah, Jay, it's great to be back. And the Ravens definitely had their eyes on Buckeyes in the 2020 draft. First Dobbins, then now Harrison, as we're talking about today.
Two talented individuals. Unfortunately, two players that had injuries, one before the season, one during the season. What can you tell us about the setback Malaki Harrison had last year?
Yeah, Malaki Harrison suffered, I would say, an injury that not a lot of people suffer when you're talking about the NFL in terms of, a gunshot wound. It's something where you talk about the NFL and you're thinking, oh, like ACL injury or Achilles injury. But no, he suffered a gunshot wound during the bye week when he ended up coming back from Columbus, and the Ravens actually, saw that, there's this whole thing going on, and he let the team know. But I think it was at a nightclub, and he got shot in the leg area. He got shot in the leg, and luckily he was okay. Everything was good. But yeah, it was an injury that I think is one of the less common ones throughout the league. Harrison had to go on injured reserve, and for the NFL has changed injured reserve rule, so it doesn't end your season automatically. You're able to come back from it. But it was a setback for Harrison, because he was a player that I at least had very high expectations for, but this gunshot wound kind of left him recovering instead of being on the field, improving and getting reps and learning. So that whole thing was a very interesting situation. And again, I'm very glad that he was able to come out from that okay, and everything is good. And he's expected to come back here and have a very big role in this defense, I think, for an inside linebacker position that has a lot of youth on it, and he's part of that.
Absolutely. I hate hearing about things like this. Players want to have fun. We all want to have entertainment and find different things to relax and get out of the hustle and bustle of our everyday job. His is being an athlete, especially one that's in the spotlight. You want to just be able to like cut loose and be yourself and have some fun with your friends and maybe some of your family members. These incidents, they're not fun to talk about. They're not fun to discuss. And I'm glad to hear that it was a leg injury, not anything upper near the heart or things like that. Yeah, leg injury's bad, but imagine it being a brain damage or damage due to some other things that would drastically affect how he can play football or if he can play football. There are some drastic things that can happen to that, but I'm just glad that it was a leg one. It was only that. And I do believe he can still play football, Kevin, if I'm correct.
Yeah, no, he was able to come back, and it's a scary thing. I mean, anything involving any gunshot wound is a scary thing. And again, I'm very glad he was okay. And you're right, there wasn't anything that happened above the body, which was good. But I think for Harrison, he kind of went into that bye week, I think, maybe with a bigger role in store, potentially. I mean, he's a player that has only had 69 tackles over the course of his 2 seasons. So again, him having to miss a bit of time, I think, did set him back a little bit. But John Harbaugh's talked about his role for 2022, maybe what positions he'll be playing. So I'm interested to see how they'll be able to use him. But again, very, very glad he's all right.
We're here with Kevin Ostreicher. He is the host of Locked On Ravens. You talk about some things that John Harbaugh has said about Mr. Harrison. What has Harbaugh said about this young man?
Yeah, so he talked about how Malik Harrison might be playing a bit of the Sam linebacker position, and the Ravens are going to give him reps there. So kind of, he said, cross-training Malik Harrison at the Sam linebacker position. And I think it's a good idea. Harrison has played that role before, and he is a very good, at least in my opinion, a very good run defender. We've seen that a couple times in Baltimore. He had a couple of plays where he stopped Derrick Henry by himself. And so stopping Derrick Henry by yourself is a tough task for anybody. Harrison's super strong, though. But the Ravens have a bit of a, I guess, uncertainty surrounding their outside linebacker room right now, just depending on the recoveries of Tyus Bowser and David Ajabo from their Achilles injuries. You just never really know when those guys will come back. The Ravens have some experience at the outside linebacker position, but it's not like veteran experience. It's Adafe Owe, who's only played a season. Dalen Hayes, who's only played a season. So to have Harrison, who now has 2 seasons under his belt, he's not this 10-year grizzled veteran or anything. But again, the more the reps Malik Harrison can get on the field in different positions, I think the better. He's a versatile player, a very good athlete, and somebody who I think in his 3rd season, it's a big year for him, considering that I think the first 2 years, considering what people were expecting from him, have been a bit, I guess, down years overall, just considering what people thought. I thought I had a 2nd-round grade on him in the 2020 draft. The Ravens get him in the 3rd. I thought it was a steal. So him and Patrick Queen together, they have Josh Bynes in there. I think it could be a great year for Harrison, but he could be playing at multiple positions, which I think is good for him.
Do you think he'll end up he'll start at some point during the season?
It depends. I think for right now, if I had to pick like traditional, like 2 inside linebackers and a 3-4, I'd pick Patrick Queen and Josh Bynes, who ended up really stabilizing that defense. But I think, again, injuries happen in this league and you never want to see them. But if it does happen, I think that maybe Harrison gets a couple starts just because of the player that he is. And the Ravens, I wouldn't say their inside linebacker room is the deepest on their roster. So if Patrick Queen gets hurt or if Josh Bynes gets hurt right now, I think Malik Harrison is that next man up. He's the 3rd inside linebacker on this roster right now. So I think that if he ends up getting those starts, he can work through them. But I think for now, he'd be that backup. But starts for me, I feel like aren't necessarily as indicative as snap counts, where, a player could not necessarily be on the starting lineup that goes across Sunday Night Football or something, but then they play like 90% of snaps because that's just how their defense works. The Ravens don't play base a ton, so they'll be able to work in, maybe 3 inside linebacker looks or with Harrison at Sam. So they'll do a lot of things to move guys around. I think Harrison will be a beneficiary of that.
I always mention starts because I do understand that a lot of people, they do equate how good you are as a player with how many games you start in a season. We had Ross Jackson, I do believe it was Ross, on recently discussing that very thing, saying it's not so much about starting, it's more about snap counts. It's the same thing in basketball. Like, you might not be a starter on the basketball court, but the last 5 minutes of a game, you are in that closing unit, that closing 5, which is huge. People used to, not really today, but James Harden didn't start for those Thunder teams, but he was in that closing minute, that closing 5 on the court. So that's a great comparison to basketball and football. You might not start, but you might get more of those snap counts than other players on the team.
Yeah, it is very important, I think, to keep that in mind, especially I mean, if you want to relate it back to a Ravens thing, the Ravens have all this depth at their safety position, 3 high-level quality starters, but there are only 2 starting safety positions, free safety and strong safety. So, I mean, if you're counting one of those guys out and not giving them starts, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're a backup and only playing 10% of snaps. They're still going to find the field. So I think for Harrison, again, if Queen and Bynes are the 2 starters at inside linebacker, that doesn't mean that Harrison's the backup and only getting 10% of snaps. He'll be on the field. I think it's a matter of just when for him, not if he gets those snaps, because again, the Ravens like to rotate in guys, keep guys fresh. And I think Harrison is a player that is very talented too.
Kevin, it's always fun having you on. Look forward to doing it again sometime down the road. If you could let everyone know where they can catch you on Twitter, and then also where they can catch your show every day as well.
Yeah, Jay, every time it's a blast with you. And for me, you can find me on Twitter at ChaosSharker34. The Locked On Ravens podcast is on there as well, at Locked On Ravens. We do 5 days a week Ravens content, of course, on the Locked On Podcast Network.
It's always fun. This Buckeye road trip around the NFL is not stopping in Baltimore. It's just going to keep moving along. And I'm glad Kevin can help us and make a stop right here on the show once again to help us learn about season expectations for Mr. Malaki Harrison during today's show. Kevin, thank you for coming back on.
Thanks so much, Jay.